Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Bradford Animation Festival. This is the 19th edition of the Bradford Animation Festival, and this is actually our third day. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Vanessa Boyce from Double Negative, who's a CG supervisor at Double Negative, worked on some amazing films like Inception and recently Total Recall, here to talk about the generation of urban landscapes. And Vanessa's also talking later over in Pitchville as well, so you get double Vanessa today. So welcome, Vanessa, and thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Right, so Double Negative, we've got a bit of a history of doing environments for many feature films, like the Batman films. We've created Gotham City for the last 3 Batmans, Inception, and more recently, the cities in Total Recall. So over the years, we've kind of developed tools and techniques that we think work really well, and kind of make convincing cities. So our goal in terms of what we strive to do in terms of coming from visual effects is to make our work invisible, and that means we don't really want anyone to notice that our work's there. If you would notice it's a CG city, it means it's not working for whatever reason. So that's our goal, is to make it invisible. So our approach is basically, as you can see, reference is everything to us. We have to base everything we do on photography, on real life, and in order to replicate real life, reference is the start for everything. So whether it's a show like when we're recreating New York for Cloverfield or World Trade Center, or whether it's inventing a brand new city that doesn't exist, like the ones in Total Recall, we always have to start from real life reference, and this is the kind of reference I'm talking about, which is photography. We literally, if we can get access to the environment that we're about to build, we take literally thousands and thousands of photos, kind of just try and get as much coverage as we can of the city or the environment that we want to recreate. If we can get up onto rooftops, we get up on rooftops and photograph down onto the city, or if we've got access to a cherry picker, we'll get up there. Basically, you can never have enough. We just, as much as you can get, because it's going to drive everything that you do in terms of textures and matte paintings and projections. And it's kind of what makes it look photographic. The other thing we do is LiDAR or survey the scene that we're in. So that means basically, scanning the geometry of the world, so we can spit out nice, accurate models, which is really important for us. Obviously, more recently, over the last couple of years, photogrammetry software is kind of getting more and more advanced. So you can, like yourselves, you can just go out and take some photos of an environment, plug them into like PhotoFly or PhotoScan, and it will calculate for you a nice little model with textures, and it's a really good starting point for us. And we've started to use photogrammetry a lot more because LiDAR is expensive. And the other thing that we do is take lots of lighting reference and lighting data. In order to reconstruct the lighting later, we need to know how the environment reacts to that light. So it's a case of taking lots of photos of street lamps or high dynamic range images to reconstruct that world later on. So in terms of the tools we use kind of the staple, these are like the industry standard tools that we use for environments, which are kind of the backbone of everything we do. I'm sure you've heard of most of them. But in addition to those, we also have a really strong R&D department who create tools just for us. And a lot of these tools are very specifically aimed at our environments and our cities, to which Stig and Witherbox, which are my 2 favourite tools. They've been around for quite a long time, but I think they've made a massive difference to our pipeline. Basically, Stig is a way we can take lots and lots of photographs on set, pan and tile style, plug them into Stig, it automatically stitches it all back together and gives you beautifully high-res photography. Takes account of the lens, does all the clever stuff, but also puts it into a database that allows the artist to see really clearly what photography we have. And so you go from thousands of photos to a handful of really, really good quality ones. And we use it throughout the pipeline. It's kind of fed into Nuke, and it does all sorts of stuff. It's kind of a lifesaver. And the other one is Windowbox, which is basically putting rooms inside of buildings. When you've got loads of skyscrapers or lots of buildings, you need to have rooms inside them, especially when it's night time. You can see all the lights are on. Rather than making rooms, which would be quite time consuming, we've got this really, really good software called Windowbox, which basically you take a real room, you photograph it with a fisheye lens, and you map those photographs back onto a cube, basically. But the really good thing about it is that the artist can sit down and really, really quickly with just changing some buttons, say things like, oh, I want half the building to have the light switched on, and you just press a button and it's done. Or I want the blinds to be up on 20% of the buildings. Or you can change buildings from being hotel rooms to office rooms and things like that. And so if you look at any of our feature films like Dark Knight or Inception or anything like that, you'll see anytime you go past a skyscraper, you're pretty much looking at Windowbox in play. So the other thing, I've got a little video here for this one, but procedural cities is something that we're starting to get into at DNEG. For Total Recall, we needed to have the flexibility to be able to create a lot of city without having to individually model each one. A procedural system like City Engine allows us to do that, allows us to just build a small selection of models, and by just changing parameters, rules that we define, you can change that building into an entirely new building. And it's an incredibly powerful way of working, and particularly if you've got a city that has a lot of the same style of building, like we had on Total Recall. They're currently using it on the new Superman to create Metropolis at DNEG. So it's something that we've only just started looking at, but it seems like a really powerful tool for us. And you can just imagine trying to do this by hand. Just, it's so much more flexible for us. Tips and tricks. In addition to the tools that we use and the kind of approaches, there's a couple of things that I found over the years that really make a big difference to environments and cities. One of which is detail. And what I mean by detail is if you look out onto a real town or city and just analyse how much stuff there is in the world in terms of aircon units on the top of a building, or vents, or steam and road signs. There's just a colossal amount of that stuff, and we need to get it into our worlds, otherwise it just doesn't look, it just looks CG. So we tend to have kind of small armies of people who their job is, on a show to just make lots and lots of lampposts and bins, and it sounds boring, but it's totally essential. The other thing that I think is really important is imperfection. And what I mean by that is, by its very nature, CG is quite perfect, the way it generates very, very straight, clean, perfect geometry, beautifully rendered reflections. And that's what makes something not look very real in CG, is just being a little bit too perfect. So we spend a lot of time trying to make it not perfect, and that involves things like make sure we don't have too many perfectly straight edges on the sides of buildings, things like warping windows, making sure that there's never a perfect reflection on the side of a window, or even things like adding a construction site into the background of a building, background of a city, just to kind of mess up the city and just make it not look too planned. And it's it's quite a struggle to kind of balance that correctly and just make sure that it's, you know, you're not just making it, turn it into a mess of a city, but those are the, out of everything I do, I think those two are the most important things to kind of finish a city. So yeah, that's kind of our very brief introduction into what we do at DNEG. I'm going to show you a little show reel put together of all our environments, so you can see all of this in practice.
Thanks, Vanessa. That was fantastic. Martin's not leaving the building. He's just going to get his laptop from behind the screen. But whilst he does that, so as well as amazing special effects in big sort of Hollywood blockbuster feature films, city generation and architecture and urban design, also obviously an integral part in many computer games, sort of urban environments, and also architecture and interior design as well. Martin has a career that kind of crosses all of them, really. So he started at Teesside University, studying a degree there up in Middlesbrough, doing computer animation and 3D modelling. Before then, working in the games industry. What year did you work in the games industry? Sorry, I'll let 1848. So I'll let him concentrate. But then also then moved into doing more sort of interior design and architecture with his own company called Complete Vision. But Martin now works over in Holland, the Netherlands, at Breda University, teaching students about the world of 3D modelling and interior design and graphics and architecture. Okay, so I'll hand over to Martin to tell you a little bit more about his work. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name's Martin Walker. As Tom said, I used to work in the games industry. I've jumped from the game industry to working as an architectural visualiser, and for the last 2 years I've been working as a lecturer at Breda University in Holland. So I've sort of jumped around a little bit from one career to another, but I just want to talk a little bit about the sort of pipeline of working as a visualiser. So from the extreme end of the spectrum to Vanessa's fantastic presentation, working as a visualiser is quite a lonely little existence. Creating imagery in a small dark room on your own for not much money, but it's still great fun. So anyway, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the pipeline. I started off with a Masters of Science degree in computer animation at Teesside. I worked in video game development, went on to be a visualiser, and now I'm a teacher in Holland. Some of the titles I worked on back in the days when games were relatively quick to turn around, 6 to 12 months. And now I still do image visualization for a lot of companies in the UK, as well as my teaching. And all the images I'm going to show you today, I put these in on purpose. Not one of them took longer than a day to create. They're all 7 to 8 hours of work, just by myself. And I'm going to illustrate this point further on in the slide. So just a broad selection of images that I've created for different purposes: concept imagery, planning, marketing, branding. When you start off as a visualizer, you think all you're going to do is buildings. You end up doing all sorts of stuff, all weird and wonderful stuff. Some of it boring, some of it really interesting. But I find it fascinating because day in, day out, you'll get a new job, which is a big thing that I enjoy about it. So yeah, I went into lecturing, which is something I really enjoy because coming from a games background, when I went into working as an image visualizer, basically people who've never come from a real-time games background, they model and they texture horribly. And I don't mean that to be in a derogatory term. It looks beautiful at the end of the day, but it's very disorganised, millions of polys for no reason. It's very unoptimised. So it was a real wake-up call for me to go and work with in a different career from this. So the kids that we teach over in Holland, we train them up, and we sort of boot camp them a little bit, and we'd really train them up to be optimised, to be tidy with the geometry, to be tidy with the texture work, and it reaps benefits. Just to give you a little bit of a sales pitch about our course, because we're out in a tiny little city in Breda, no one's ever heard of us in Holland. We've just been voted the best games course in Holland. There's about 4 or 5 different games courses. We've been we're one of the few courses in Europe to be Sony accredited. We have actual PS3 dev kits there, and Sony have taken us as one of their partners of choice. And we recently got told by a Sony UK producer that he considers us to be in the top 5 games courses in the world. So we're a really great course. We have some really great students and some some great graduates. Okay, so people always say, why leave the game industry? It's the best job in the world. Okay, my reason that I left, I worked for 10 years. I sort of worked up the ladder. I ended up being head of art for a studio, and I just basically got a little bit burnt out with it. I just got a bit fed up with it. All-nighters, you know, projects coming back. And I think I got sick of working on the same sort of piece of art for like 6 to 12 months. So I thought, right, I'm going to jump ship and do something different. So I took the plunge, and I worked in house with an architect in Leeds. Stable working environment, so I thought. There's no such thing as a stable working environment if you work in any facet of CG. But the thing I do enjoy is the quick turnaround of projects. I think the longest I've worked on a project has been 2 weeks, so it's a very quick turnaround, which I really enjoy, so you never get stuck with the same project coming back at you. And a vast range of assignments. You can be working on a house one day, a hospital the next day, a school the next day. And for me personally, because I was trained in interior architecture, I found that really enjoyable. So that's my take on it. But real-time background is a really great start. So I think there's a lot of you guys here from Bradford University. What you're learning there, real-time CG modelling, is great. It's a really great foundation to build upon. So even if you want to go into video, if you want to go to games or TV, it's a great foundation to have working real-time modelling. Tidy geometry, optimised scenes and textures, good housekeeping habits, things named properly. Because when you work with game engines, everything has to be named properly, everything has to be grouped properly, good hierarchy, so it's a really good foundation. And also a good solid technical and artistic problem solving skills. If you want to be a CG artist these days, doesn't matter what you want to do, you need to learn how to script, you have to be technical. Okay, that's the way the industry is shifting. All the graduates we have, they all go out and they can program in Python, a lot of them can program in C++. They use procedural modelling tools. They're very, very technical, and that's the sort of way it's going. Artistic merits, you work with other great artists in the game industry, and you build up your artistic abilities. Negatives, you work alone. You work you're either a sole trader or you work in teams of 2 or 3. So sharing of knowledge can suffer, which I found. Artistic license is very restricted. If you go and work in TV and video effects, you've got a little bit more creativity, but basically it has to be visually accurate from what your client wants. Okay, so it can be very restrictive. When I started off, I was trying to do all these fancy things, and the client said, "No, we just want to see a nice." I was getting carried away with it. And you realise you're working for a client now, and they want a certain image. Timescales and deadlines are totally different. You might get a phone call on Tuesday for something that's needed for the end of Wednesday, which would never happen in video games, obviously. So timelines can shift a lot. And working with pre-rendered and real-time computer graphics is again very different. Real-time instant results. You can see what you get in pre-rendered. You have to wait for the render to finish, and you might have to do some composition work afterwards. So there's a different pipeline, a different way of working. Positive for me, great, using cutting edge renders, V-Ray, mental ray, all these things. It's great to see you work on a big billboard on the side of a building. It pays extremely well. It pays far. This is disputable. Some people might disagree, but I think it pays a lot better than working in video games. Not many iterations rendered. Travel, you get to see some great places and great sites. So I'm just going to talk basically how a visualization project starts and finishes. Okay, so pre-production, you go, you meet your client, you talk through the plans and elevations, and again, people don't sort of realise all this stuff goes on before the final image that comes out. You talk about camera angles, your views, you discuss materials. What it's going to be. Is it going to be on the internet? Is it going to be on a big billboard? Is it going to be on TV? That determines your rendering abilities. Is it have to render a big 12,000 by 10,000 image, or is it just a small image to go on the internet? On what the client wants, and generally the client looks for you for the answers. You go in there and they wave the checkbook in front of you, but they're looking for you to tell them what they want. So you have to sort of build up a little bit of confidence and sort of saying, right, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, build up a little bit of trust in your client. So you get a package of works. Generally you go in, you'll get drawings, CAD drawings, you'll get elevations, sections, hopefully lots of site photographs. I've got clients who give me a fantastic package of work. I go in, they give me a big envelope full of plans and drawings and samples, photographs, and that's all I need, which is fantastic. But that's very rare. Generally you get this, you get some horrible drawings, some really awkward imagery to work with, and that drastically affects your time scale. If you're working with CAD files, you can bring them into your 3D software and basically, draw everything very precisely. If you've got this sort of stuff, you have to, do some measurements and scales and figure things out. So this really affects when you quote for a job as well. I've screwed myself over so many times when I first started off quoting for the same amount for a job with this type of reference than a job with a really concise package of reference, and it takes you twice as long. But talking of reference, I'll just echo what Vanessa said. Reference is everything. Reference is absolutely everything. Never ever work from there. You have to have reference imagery in front of you all the time. You can never have enough reference. Production. Basically, 3D Max and V-Ray have become the tools of choice in architectural visualization. There's numerous reasons why that is, but it generally is the case. Not to say you can use other software, but a lot of the plugins and the assets are 3D Max format. So if you are considering a career in this, you should really, get up to speed on 3D Max. We teach Maya over in Breda, so it's quite unusual for me to be teaching one software but using another software for my own work. But packages are very, very similar, okay? And that's something you have to accept. The 3D package, no matter what it is, they're all very similar. The tools are there, it's just finding where the different tools and the different buttons are. It's Google SketchUp. Google SketchUp. Everyone laughs when I talk about Google SketchUp, and I don't think I've not been able to convert anyone yet. Everyone who laughs at the Google SketchUp, I show them like half an hour of how it functions and how it can speed the pipeline up, and they're like, wow, that's really cool. I was the same. I laughed at Google SketchUp when someone first showed me. I was like, nah, it's a toy, it's a free thing that Google put out there, it's no good. But if you've used it, you will realise it's a fantastic tool, really, really powerful tool. And if not that many of us do, but there's no reason why you can't take a project all the way through the pipeline to the end, because SketchUp's supported by V-Ray and Maxwell shade lights. So you can basically create images like this. You can spend £150 on a rendering engine, free version of SketchUp, and you can get imagery like that. It's quite a stunningly powerful piece of software. I do most of my work in SketchUp, and then I take it into 3D Max to put the organic stuff in, landscaping, trees, planting, cars, all that sort of stuff. It's not great for organic topography, but it's very, 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 very powerful for architectural, rectilinear creation of geometry. There's a whole heap of packages out there. I think, like I say, 3D Max is the main one. Some people use Maya Blender, but I've never come across a project or another visualizer who doesn't use 3D Max and V-Ray. Just how it is, I guess. Procedural modelling. Procedural modelling is the new thing for me. It's a really exciting, slightly daunting area of 3D modelling. Can I just ask if anyone in here actually does any procedural modelling? Just sort of one. It's amazing. It's amazing. I only got introduced to procedural modelling a few years ago, and it's stunning. I just want to just show you a video of a graduate of ours. It's not particularly architectural, but it's just to show you the pipeline of how a procedural modelling tool works. So you can see it's a really, really powerful, intensely amazing tool. The only problem with it, well, there's a lot of problems. The main one is the learning curve is like that. It's a very, very steep learning curve. It's node-based architecture. There's a lot of maths involved, but it's a really, really fascinating tool. These days as well, to be a 3D artist, it's really, really helpful to have some programming skills. Scripting, Python, a bit of C++, because automating your pipeline and being able to speed up your workflow is really, really important and really helpful So again, you know, just looking to hone in your technical skills. The main thing I always say with artistically, with working as a visualizer, think like a photographer, because that's what you are. You are basically a photographer. Someone took a photograph then, just as I said it. You're basically a photographer in the CG world, so you've got to think like a photographer. Okay, composition, light, color, tone, camera angle, lens settings. It's just the same in CG as it is in the real world. Especially now the renderers use physical light and camera settings. So if you've got a good solid understanding of how an SLR camera works, it really helps in your CG work. So you know, just different shots. Context as well. Again, this is something we teach our students. Context is everything. Consider the environment. You know, we see a lot of weak CG images where the artists spent a lot of time modelling up the actual building, but they haven't given two hoots about the environment. So the context is lost, so it just looks horrible and lost. So you know, 2 images, with one on the left, obviously very nice. The context being thought about, the site's being built, so it makes a big difference. Photoshop skills as well. Hone your Photoshop skills. You've been doing a lot of Photoshop work, color correction, aberration, focus, vignetting, and again, just echoing what Vanessa said, CG is always perfect, and we have to unperfect. Is that a correct term? We have to basically, you know, round off those imperfections. So you know, there's errors in there, there's tiling, the reflections aren't great. So bringing it into Photoshop and just getting rid of those CG perfections to try and make it look not like CG. Plugins. There's a vast range of plugins. Again, this is why 3D Max is a great option for architectural visualization, because there's a lot of plugins out there that are built for 3D Max. I've noticed since I've been teaching Maya to my students, the plugins aren't available to Maya. Things like foliage and grass and RPC plugins. So again, that's why Max is sort of at the forefront for creating architectural stuff. So just keep an eye out for plugins. There's some great forums out there. Just keep an eye on what products are out there, because you'll be quite surprised what products there is for a reasonable amount of money that can save you, you know, heaps and heaps of work. Generally, the plugins aren't too expensive. Some of them are, you know, a bit pricey, but they're not too expensive. And again, lighting. You know, the modern renderers have got fantastic lighting tools, and V-Ray is great. It's perhaps not the best in quality, but just the robustness and ease of use and accessibility, it's a great option. I think that's why we use it a lot. Photometric lighting. Photometric lighting is basically using IS web data, so you can truthfully recreate basically these lights using web data, how bright they are, the fall off, the hue. Post-production, again, generally when you finish a visualization, you very rarely just finish it. It goes into Photoshop, and you do a lot of work with it, adding some effects. You know, there's all manner of effects, color correction, all sorts of stuff. Just makes it slicker as well, especially when you're working with animation. Just doing a little bit of extra motion graphics works with it. And time versus cost versus quality. Unfortunately, one big drawback of working as an image visualizer, especially for architectural stuff, is you never get it to the quality you want. You just have to cut it off at a point. So when we see that, like I was just drooling over Vanessa Shuriel before, thinking it's beautiful, you know, fantastic, you know, it's perfect. Unfortunately, when you work with architectural stuff, time and budget and manpower doesn't really allow for that to take you to that level. Even though you'd love to do it, you know, we never seem to get there. And especially what seems to kill it is you get it to a nice level, and the client comes back and he wants to change all these different things, and you have to re-render it, and it always ends up being photoshopped and bodged, and it's a shame. But it's one of those sort of like cloud to the silver lining of working in this industry. But some key tips I always say to people who want to start out: archive your work well. That's really important. Build a library, because you'll use assets over and over and over again. You use the same bricks and the same roof tiles and the same grass textures. You use all these things over and over again, so archive them well so that they're really accessible. Build a library. Only model what you will see. It sounds stupid, it sounds obvious, but so many people model all this detail at the back of the building or the back of the site that will never ever get seen. So just model what you're going to see. It's a big theatre set. Think of it like that. Optimize your render settings again. Make sure you know your renderer well. People push the quality settings right up to 11 on the dial, and wonder why it takes 15 years to render a small scene. So you have to be, careful with your render settings, and use render passes more, pre-comp work. I've started to use composite and toxic for my post-composition work. That's an excellent package, because you can tweak out values, specular values, reflections, shadow passes, depth passes. You can do that in real time in post-process, as opposed to hitting the render button and waiting for another 5 hours. And also buying assets. Often it's cheaper to buy an asset. Sometimes I do a job and it's got like a couple of ornate sort of statues in or something like that. It's going to take me days to model that up, so I'll just buy, Turbo's good. There's a whole heap of resources out there where you can buy an asset for like 20, 30 euros, pounds, dollars, whatever. It's sometimes cheaper just to buy those assets in and use them, rather than spending like your valuable time modelling them all up. I'm sorry, that was a bit of a whistle-stop one, but that's it. So I think we're going to have questions at the end, Tom. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
Next up, we have Ben Hall from Criterion Games. Ben's also a graduate of the University of Bradford as well. So Ben studied computer animation and special effects just up the road at the university, before then moving to Criterion Games down in Guildford, most famous for the amazing Burnout racing series, and more recently taking on the Need for Speed franchise as well. So Ben is one of the lead environment artists at Criterion, and is responsible for all the cities and all the worlds that the cars race through. So it's great to have Ben here. One of you stopping over in Bradford. But yeah, if it's all sorted and plugged in,
I think
I'll
so.
hand over. Yeah,
Let's
okay.
go.
Thank you. Cheers, Ben. Thanks.
Well, as Tom said, my name's Ben Hall. I'm lead world designer at Criterion Games and a graduate, so it's good to be back in Bradford after I was here last year, but it's not often I managed to get back. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to quickly run through me, how I got to where I am today. It's not probably the most standard route you'd see. So, university, I was all about cars. I think Ian will probably remember I was obsessed with modelling cars and rendering cars. So back in the day, we just moved over to Tomorrow at Bradford. It was all about HDR imagery and getting rendering going. And that's what I used on my portfolio to try and get me into the games industry. And that's what got me in the door at Criterion. Last model there, looking at it now, it's terrible, but that was probably the asset that got me the job. It was kind of a speed modelling test, 24 hours. The guys at Criterion were worried as a student that I wasn't going to be quick enough to model, so put together this asset between 2 interviews, and that's what got me in as a car artist on Burnout Revenge. It was the first title I worked on. It was for the Xbox 360, so we were taking assets from PlayStation 2 and Xbox and moving them across to the new console, which was interesting, but not environments, not world. So I'll rifle through this and get onto how I got there. Moved into Burnout Paradise, again stayed with the car team, got to model car assets, which was perfect for me and lots of fun. Working with an outsourced team, modeling other components to the cars, so there was sort of asset management and working more as a management artist as well as an actual artist on assets for the game itself. We moved on to the year of Paradise, which was our DLC year for Burnout, and got to start making some more crazy stuff, which was good fun, taking things to a new level, dirt buggies, super hot rods, crazy stuff like that. We did some R&D, working with programs. We worked in little pods and started doing things like cockpit view for the F1 cars and flying around the city, which we actually got working and rendering. We never shipped it, but we got it all working. And that's when I started moving over to World. We started creating the island, which was for the big DLC pack for Burnout Paradise, and there was a gaping hole in the environment team. They needed somebody to come on board and help out, and I was like, yeah, I'll do that. I used to make cars, and I have got making cities. It sounds like fun, so I joined the team to work on the island, and it quickly kind of became apparent that I kind of had a knack for it. I could work. We have to work with our environments in a way that we have to make them look great. We've got a very limited set of memory that we can use on the consoles. We've got to run this thing at 60 frames a second, so we can't spend 15 hours rendering a frame. We've got to do it in a millionth of a second so that we can render it on the consoles, because it's got to think about all the audio, all the physics and everything else. But then we've also got the gameplay, so this is kind of, I don't know if many of you played Burnout, but it's all about racing at 200 miles an hour, smashing into each other, crashing into each other, kind of parkour for cars. You want to be able to jump and do stunts and get to places where you shouldn't be able to in a car. And that was sort of something that you can't get taught, or it's very difficult to teach. It's either something that somebody who loves games and plays games can actually do and kind of gets the hang of it, or they don't. So we got kind of split at this point. We started working towards what we were going to do after Burnout and working out how we were going to split the team to utilise the people that got how we made cities and how we made gameplay, and the people that were also just fantastic artists that we could utilise their skills in a different way. So moving on from Burnout, we moved on to our first Need for Speed title. This was Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. Slightly different from Burnout, but we wanted to keep that DNA within the game. And then on this game I moved then from being just kind of a generic environment artist. I moved up a level, started working much more closely with the design team, and actually started this new thread of the environment team that we kind of defined as a sketch world team. And our goal was to grey box the world, but grey box it to a point at which it was visually representative of what we were going to create from an art point of view, but also make sure that we could get the gameplay spot on. Because what we wanted to make sure we could do is get the gameplay team in there and get the guys that are building races and events as quickly as possible, so we could iterate on this stuff, which we've heard much. We do lots. So what we did is we started working with the designers and defining the rules of what the world was going to be like. So we have to work very closely with the physics guys, the driving experience guys, because how the cars handle, how things work, is we've got to make sure that players can drive around this world. It reads well, it can react to how the road's changing, but then you've also got to react to having 8 cop cars chasing you, or 8 other racers driving around with you trying to smash into you and take you out as you're playing the game. So we defined a set of rules which we then used to create this beautiful bit of reference. And I think this is a little bit like what Martin was saying. This was the brief we got given from our designer. We had to work with this and make up a road. So this was a brief for a woodland big timber road, and this was something that worked for Need for Speed, but for Hot Pursuit, but was something that we definitely wanted to iterate on when we moved forward away from this project. Using our in-house tools, we've got our own game engine, our own tools. We model mainly in Maya, although we're moving away from a pipeline that limits us to just using Maya, trying to open it up so that people can use Blender or 3D Max or whichever software they prefer. But for this project we were limited to at least exporting from Maya to get things into the game. We've got tools within our world editor, which are what we use to place down assets, so all the different individual assets of the track get made separately in a separate Maya scene, get brought in and all composited together in our world editor. We've got an in-house road tool which allows us to build out the splines, and while it doesn't always give you the sort of flexibility that you can get out of modelling things like that by yourself, what it does do is it brings a lot of the other things that are running behind the scenes. So the actual visual mesh that you see when you're playing a game is not the same as the mesh that the car's actually reacting to and the physics are reacting to. There's a secondary mesh in there that the AI cars are using, so we have to think about all these behind the scenes things and actually manage all of that. So our in-house tools allow us to do that, and that's all supported by a background server that's custom to us. It's using GCMS server away from Perforce. I mean, Perforce is probably one you may or may not have used, but we tried to get away from that. It's very programmer orientated, so we've got a much more sort of client-based setup. And then this is the sketch world, sort of how we used it for Hot Pursuit, and it was basically a phased system for bringing together the playability of the road and the visual look of the road. And what this allowed us to do was quickly get something in using the road ribbon tool, and then start building it up through phases. And we could gate this through various people, so we could work with the designers on the road ribbon, make sure that they're happy with the handling, make sure that the road's interesting enough to drive on just by itself, but also not too challenging that when you've got a helicopter, 8 cop car, spike strips and EMPs firing off all around you, that it's too difficult to drive and navigate through. And then we can start working with the art director, bringing in the actual visual assets. So the theme of it was the giant redwoods in California. So again, reference was key to make sure that we captured that feeling. And then we worked on the art for this. Part of the artwork for Hot Pursuit was made in Stockholm in Sweden using the DICE team. Some of our artists from Criterion went out there. I was lucky enough to go out there and work with them out there. Sort of EA as a studio, as a company, we've got studios all over the world. So we're based in Guildford, just down in the south. But we've got studios in Stockholm, Vancouver, Edmonton, San Francisco. So there's opportunities available to work with the other teams. We learn from each other, we work with each other, and this was a great opportunity for us to work with the Swedish team over at DICE. Then moving on to Need for Speed Most Wanted, I actually became the lead world designer, so instead of having to cope with those horrible sketches that I was given, it's now down to me to give those horrible sketches to people. What I'll do here is I'll just play a quick video which is sort of the fruits of our labour the last 2 years of what we've been doing, and then talk a bit about how we iterated on the sketchbook process. Yeah, there's a little taster of what you can expect driving around Fairhaven City, which is the city that I designed for Need for Speed Most Wanted. The brief for the game was to try and intertwine the DNA of Need for Speed and the DNA of Burnout that we'd been generating over the years at Criterion. And that sort of boiled down to 3 key areas, which were race, chase, explore. So that was the brief for the world, really, was that we needed to create an environment in which you could have great races with these super powerful supercars that you probably never get your hands on ever, while being chased by as many cops as we can physically render and chase after you, while smashing through exploration, driving places that you shouldn't really be driving. And it was all about that sort of hooning about with your mates online to become the most wanted. So it's all about playing, it's a cooperative kicking the crap out of your friends kind of game is what we went for. So this is Fairhaven City, which is the environment we ended up designing to fit all of this gameplay into. We needed to try and create a city which was cohesive, authentic, but at the same time offered up a wide range of variety for the player so that you never felt like it got boring quickly. That's quite difficult within a small space, but we also needed to pack all of this into a streaming open world at 200 miles an hour, running on PlayStation, Xbox and PlayStation Vita, which was fun. I'm going to go through one of the areas today. I mean, to sort of comment again on the reference, we sent out, and I went out as well to America and shot somewhere in the region of 10,000 photographs before we started on this game, which were all very, very useful. All of that was colour corrected using Macbeth. We had lighting artists that went out there and shot all of that for the HDR lighting, which was then implemented into our game engine. But for me, it was more about going out there and seeing America for real and sort of taking in experiences and sort of looking at places you want to go and race a car. Where do you want to take your car? How do you want to race it? Where do you want to take it where you're not allowed and where you're going to get chased by the cops? So today I'm going to talk about one of the areas which was Ripley's Point, which was our power plant. The kind of concept of the city was that it's an old, run-down American city that's similar from the original Most Wanted, but different enough with the wider range of areas. So what we did with Ripley's Point, because it was a power plant, a coal power plant, we can't go there. We can't go and photograph that. No one's going to give us permission to get in there. So there's a lot of reference collecting. It also gives us the freedom to be a little bit creative with how we do it. But we went reference collecting. We use as many different tools as we can for reference collecting. Sadly, a lot of it's Google. Just researching Flickr, using Google Earth, using Google Maps, getting in there, finding images that people have created and posted online, using maps for actually working out ways to connect things. With the power plant, I actually got as geeky as to look at videos on how power plants work and actually how things are connected together, the way the buildings work, what moves from where to where within the power plant, all to bring this authenticity to the environment. But we collected a lot of reference. Then we got into the stage, I got into the stage which was the paper design was so early for Big Timber. I did not want to be giving my guys that kind of package for the guys to be working with, because there was just no way we were going to get to what we needed to with the complexity of the environment. So we started building upon these rules, which are the connected hubs. So within the power plant, I wanted certain environments, which as I go through, you'll see what they become. But the connectivity between them needs to be something that we maintain to make sure that the routes in and out, the speed at which you can access these different hubs became important, to make sure that the area became a play area that you wanted to stay in. It wanted to cycle you back into the area, giving you the opportunity to retake jumps or find ways to lose the cops. So what we did is create this schematic and then start applying areas from real power plants to the schematic, which started to put together what was going to go where, and then that defined to some extent what the road network was going to become. And then on top of that, I started defining what was going to go where. So we've got the cooling towers in there, we've got the coal stacks, the bottom we've got the train yard, To the left, we've got the generators, which actually you see later on we moved, and the reason being that we could get it to play better if we moved it elsewhere. But all of this also has to fall into the requirements of the engine, which is draw distance, LODs, memory. So all of this has to be run through different engineers and programmers to make sure that, yeah, actually we can render this, working with our CG supervisor and technical artist to make sure that it was actually feasible to do. Also then, because we were working with an outsourced team, we had to make sure that we had enough time available in the production plan for this to be built and sent off and get all the assets back, because of the variety of all the different elements to it as well. So this paper stage basically allowed us to go through a lot of that process planning before we'd actually started making anything in 3D. Then what I did was actually, once all those pieces have been composited together, we got the final map with the layout of how things are connected together. Then I actually whiteboxed that up in 3D using Maya and got that into the game engine, and actually brought assets into that to give a visual representation of what the final thing was going to look and play like. So this was kind of like, before we'd even got it into Sketch World, this was something we could sit down and analyse and look at and work out how routes were going to connect together and start iterating before we even got anything into software. Then it went through the Sketch World process, which we took to the next level on Most Wanted. Basically almost final art, but without worrying about textures, without worrying too much about the cleanliness of geometry or LODs or anything like that. But basically we can put together the rough layout of the map, we can drive it, we can get designers in there creating race routes, we can work out where all the jumps are going to go, all the billboards are going to go. And at this stage now it's really quick with our tools to get in there and say, right, we want to smash a route through here, we want to get up onto this building, we want to jump off here. All the things that in 2D is a little bit more difficult to kind of visualize and work out. Once you've got it in here, you're driving around it with the cars, you're jumping off it, you're smashing through it, you're chasing through it. We can play multiplayer in here, we can play events, races, get cop pursuits going on. So that's how we build up the Sketch World on Most Wanted, which I hope you'll agree looks a little bit better to what we got to on Hot Pursuit. So finally we created the map in Sketch World, and this is what we then broke down into components and sent off to the outsourced team, who generated all of the assets, all of the plots, the road surfaces, and all of that came back to our internal art team then, who take those assets to the next level and run it through all of the things that Vanessa was talking about earlier. It's the imperfections, it's all the detail in the signage, the things, lights being switched on. So here's a little kind of demonstration of my very early design and concept through to what we ended up with in software. So you can see there it's got all these grind passes, we've got the VFX going on, the lighting. Most of the layout is unchanged. All we've done is iterate the routes, add more gameplay, add more options for the player. Another one there, and the final one. And that's, in a nutshell, as brief as it can be, how we design the world for Need for Speed Most Wanted.
Thanks, Ben. That was fantastic. Our next speaker is Jonathan Gales from Factory 15 Studios down in London. So Jonathan's background is actually in architecture, and I believe Megalomania, which we will be screening, was his graduation film, which, if you haven't seen it, it's absolutely stunning. I first saw it as part of the 1.0 package of films for Future Cities early this year, and was absolutely blown away. But I'd also advise you go and look at the Factory 15 portfolio online as well. They just do tremendous work. Short films, kind of visualizations, lots of different really amazing diverse stuff. So if you're set up now, Jonathan, I think you're good to go. I'll pass you over to Jonathan.
Thank you. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. Takes care of a lot of the background it's going to go through. I think I've got a slightly different introduction into this industry to most of maybe you guys sitting here on animation courses, and also from the film and VFX industries. From architecture, myself and my two colleagues that have set up a studio about a year ago, year and 2 months ago, from our master's projects. We came from architecture, and very much what we went into was to become traditional architects and design and build buildings that actually get built. And after working in industry and working in various practices within London, we went back to do our masters at the Bartlett School of Architecture, where you can study architecture but use animation and film as a drawing method, which is quite experimental. We found that was way cooler, way more interesting, and something that we want to invest more of our time into. So I'll run you through my final year project, which ran from about February through to May, was our kind of like end of year, alongside a thesis. So it's quite a short project. but it's accumulation of 2 years full-time and postgraduate alongside a thesis to accompany it. So this came from an exchange trip which I was placed on whilst I was at the Bartlett to go to Shanghai and work in a school there, where I kind of became quite interested in the idea of capital, buildings, and what I was kind of thinking about architecture and the built environment reflecting in the industry. I wanted to kind of bring back into my work, mainly because of what I think about the future of architecture in our cities, but also my kind of interest in scale and awe and the sublime. So I was living in London relatively close to the Shard, which at the stage of its construction I found incredibly interesting. Probably far more interesting in the last 2 years of its construction than it will be in the next 10, 20 years of its actual realisation. But I found this interest in the aesthetic of a construction site and almost the kind of ceremony of building a building really, really interesting. It has an ambiguity and a beauty to it, whether it's being built, whether it's being demolished, and what phase that's at, and whether that even matters. So this led on to a kind of 1 week project in November after my Shanghai placement, where the beginning of how our year works, like our tutors kind of throw a load of stuff at us and say, you go in on a Tuesday, they get given a brief, like next Tuesday you go in, you need to have a 60-second film about something. It can be about anything, but you have to kind of, go and present. So it makes you kind of charge out a load of ideas, and you maybe do 4, 5, 6 of these like 1 week projects, which a load of them go by the wayside, but something, you throw at the wall, it sticks. And I think it was this idea of construction and the scale of it, which I kind of like hung to throughout the rest of my year. So I went away, and the first part of the project really, I wanted to sum up an ambition and also an aesthetic style. So this kind of came from a Photoshop montage, a collage. I found an aerial image of London, and just started kind of playing with it and designing the look, the aesthetic, the colours, the tone, the light, everything about it, which kind of in a nutshell, as one, just as an art piece, it might say something or speak to me. This led on to producing a series of 3D artworks, which were the centre of the project. And that kind of like first 4 weeks of the project were like the most fun, because it's a hell of a load of design, a load of modelling, kind of get to control and do everything, but you're completely free. But then from that, they gave me such a clear direction about how to attack the rest of it and produce an animation which kind of explores these worlds. This is a drawing which we were kind of pushed to do throughout our masters, which our tutor called chronograms, which effectively is a construction or technical drawing like you would for an architectural building, but in order to make a filmic or animation project. And what it does is it sets up the aesthetic ambition, the content, but also the kind of the technical aspects of what we need to kind of produce this. So if I were to give this and my assets to my colleague, they could take this and make maybe a slightly different piece, but along the same lines. And it's that kind of idea of producing technical information to build buildings which are incredibly complex objects, which is not too dissimilar to the workflow of film, VFX or games, where you have a certain amount of art direction, but a huge team and amount of people who have to work on it to make it work. I mean, unfortunately, in the case of the masters I studied in was of individual teams, and I had to do everything myself, like my colleagues did. But that's kind of part of the learning curve, same as you guys in animation. So going back and talk about references, a lot of my references from an architectural and art background were in other architects and art and drawing, and this series of Carceri drawings by Giovanni Battista Piranesi were incredibly early etchings, but completely speculative and fictional environments which geometrically don't make sense, completely labyrinthine but beautiful, and very kind of evocative of a kind of tone and atmosphere. And I think this is something which I wanted to take from, not too directly, but kind of hark back to as well within my own work, as well as looking at people like Jeremy Bentham and the idea of perception, panopticons, and architectures which control environments and control people. So designing space to create an emotion. This slide may kind of like, I hope you can see some kind of parallel with Bentham's panopticon designs, in way of just kind of like geometric setup, which within architecture and the creation of space, something which is really interesting to me. More technical elements of how I produce some of the animation techniques varied from 2.5D, like 2D animation techniques within 3D space, and going through taking my Photoshop file, kind of breaking it down, bringing that into 3D space, and then projecting some things and using matte painting ideas to kind of be very efficient, almost no rendering time involved in this. But then looking at how that's taken from the original photograph right through to my grading ambition on it. And then other things which are kind of maybe more technical, kind of like exercises. In my head, I kind of maybe was interested in a bit of cloth, so I thought I'd try it out, just learn it a bit. And then just an extensive amount of modelling as well, which I was particularly interested in as well. Some of the kind of later scenes, which came from an earlier project, a 1-week project, was also kind of a bit of destruction. There was a kind of everyone who studied in my course was slightly interested in the destruction of architecture as much as they were interested in the creation of architecture. Maybe that says something about the course that I studied or not the people that I studied with, but it's definitely an obsession. And here's just some stills from the final thing. Well, this first scene, which you see hopefully. All the movement was taken from camera tracking, camera moving, so choreographing a movement with a camera, analysing that data, bringing the information into your 3D softwares, and using the virtual camera, which is taken from a physical camera in a completely virtual space. And it's these techniques as well, which is something that we're using now on film projects, working with more VFX kind of workflows, but using kind of match moving, camera tracking, and all kind of real world data to kind of create more realism, create more of a kind of just appropriate it to an edit. Like, so that's the end of that. You can play the Blu-ray.